1 John 3:11 through 12 says, "For this is the message that ye have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. And wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil, and his brother's righteous." Well, we're launching into our 7th week of our study through 1 John here on the Walk Talks podcast. And happy Monday to you. I hope you're excited for another week. It's hard to believe we're already in July this summer. The summer is going by so quickly, and this study has been so beneficial. I hope that you have taken the opportunity to join us in studying this wonderful letter from John to the church at Ephesus and the surrounding areas. The verses that we've just read introduce to us a new topic, a new theme that we're going to pick up on throughout the remainder of John's letter, and that is the topic of love. We read in verse 11 just a moment ago that this is the command: we should love one another. Through the remainder of this week and through more podcasts that we'll have in coming weeks, this will be the topic, this will be the central theme of all that we discuss. It is this, that we should love one another. You notice in verse 11 that he begins by saying, "This is the message that ye have heard from the beginning." We've encountered this sort of statement several times through our study already, and he's reminding us once again that this commandment to love is central to the message of the gospel. This statement is going to act sort of as the thesis for the podcasts that we have on Walk Talks this week, that we should love one another. John says, stick with what the apostles have said. Stick with what you have learned from the very beginning. Go back to the Word and don't listen to anyone else who says that love is not essential to the Christian faith. And in love, John is going to lay out for us and explain that this is how you know that you are a true believer. This action of loving one another is an ongoing action. And really, it should characterize the life of every believer. You remember what Jesus said in John 13:35, "By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if you have love one for another." Paul writes of this distinguishing characteristic of believers in Galatians 5. He says, "The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith." At the very top of that list, it is love for the brethren. He writes again in 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 9, "As touching brotherly love, ye need not that I write unto you, for ye yourselves are taught of God," here's what they were taught, "to love one another." This is the distinguishing characteristic of all of God's children. And this is the command, this is the thesis, that we should love one another. Through this week of podcasts, I want this to be profoundly applicable to your life. Each episode will be titled "The Action Step That We Are to Take as a Result of the Truth That We Are Studying Together this week." Today, I want to call you to this action to, first of all, examine the illustration. On the heels of verse 11 is verse 12, of course, where the Bible says, "Not as Cain, who was of that wicked one and slew his brother." Right after he lays out the thesis for this portion of the text, love one another, he says, here's how you shouldn't love. Here's the opposite of what I am instructing you to do. Don't be like Cain. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, you know exactly who John is referring to when he directs our attention to this individual Cain. You remember Adam and Eve, the first humans on the planet, and after their fall, they have children, Cain and Abel. And Abel and Cain both offer a sacrifice up to God, and God accepts the sacrifice of Abel, and God rejects the sacrifice of Cain, and Cain becomes jealous of his brother's relationship with God, and he is so moved in his jealousy that he kills his brother. He commits murder. And that's exactly what verse 12 says. He says that he slew his brother, but notice there that he also says that he was of that wicked one. We notice first here Cain's identity. He belonged to the kingdom of the wicked one. He was in the realm or the kingdom, the domain of darkness. Notice also Cain's hate. He slew his brother. That word slew literally means to butcher or to slaughter. It's used throughout the Bible to describe what the priests would do to the sacrifice in the Old Testament. How they would tear apart that animal and slay it on the altar. That's the hate that Cain had for his brother. Notice then, third of all, in this verse, Cain's motive. The Bible will ask the question, okay, why did he slay his brother in verse 12? Notice this, because his own works were evil and his brothers were righteous. So he slew his brother because his work, his act of worship to God was evil and his brother's act of worship was righteous. I'm reminded of what Proverbs says in the 29th chapter, in the 10th verse, that the bloodthirsty hate the upright. They hate what they do. They hate how they live. They hate how they love. They hate their relationship with God because their ways are wicked. This is the clash of the kingdoms, the clash that the domain of light has with the domain of darkness. The domain of darkness hates the work of the light because it is totally contrary to their work. One preacher put it this way, that godlessness is disturbed by the condemning presence of righteousness in its midst, and it would remove the cause of its discomfort if it could. And isn't that true that you look around the world that we live in today and you see the profound and intense hatred for that which is right? And it's because their deeds are evil. You remember what Jesus said in John 3, men love darkness because their deeds are evil. They don't want their deeds and their actions and their attitudes and their reactions that are taking place in their heart to be revealed. And folks, when you know Christ, that is exactly what takes place. That light shines in and reveals to us exactly who we are, exactly what sin is present in our life. We learn from this illustration in this man by the name of Cain, not what to emulate, but what to avoid. You see, the very first step in loving other people is to be saved. It is to have the light shown into our hearts so that our wicked ways and our sinfulness are revealed and illuminated to us. This is how we are not to love. One commentator wrote of the progression that we see in Cain's life, that is from jealousy to hatred to murder. And he affirms that this is a natural and a terrible sequence in the course of sinful humanity. You see, this is why the heart is so important. Because that jealousy that was stirred in Cain led him to a certain type of action. And it's not until the gospel shines into our life that we are able to overcome jealousy and hatred and yes, even murder. May I encourage you today to think about this illustration. And as we launch into other applications and other commands to love one another, heed the warning that the unregenerate, the unredeemed, the lost, far from God individual has this hatred in their heart, and they are not capable of true love, but rather they love their sin, and in loving their sin, they hate those who work righteousness. This is the first call to us in these verses to examine the illustration and to avoid hatred like Cain.